Welcome to Everything Co-op, bringing you information on how cooperatives can help improve your quality of life. This show is being sponsored by the National Co-op Bank. The NCB is dedicated to strengthening communities nationwide for the delivery of banking and financial services for the nation's cooperatives, their members, and other socially responsible organizations. For more information on the power of community ownership, visit ncb.coop. That's NCOOP. Now stay tuned for your host, Vernon Oakes.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Everything Co-op. This is Vernon Oakes. Today we're discussing one of the most important developments of our time, artificial intelligence. AI is changing how we work, communicate, make decisions, and access information. Yet beneath the technological questions are larger questions of ownership, democracy, and economic power. Who owns AI? Who benefits from AI? Who governs AI? Will AI concentrate wealth and power in the hands of a few corporations? Or can it become a tool that strengthens communities and expands democratic participation? I am very interested in getting some of these questions answered. And so I would be asking our guest, Nathan Schneider, who is professor of media studies at the University of Colorado Boulder. He's the director of Media Economies Design Labs, author, scholar, and one of the leading voices connecting technology, democracy, and cooperative ownership. Nathan has written extensively about platform cooperatives, democratic governance, digital ownership, and what he calls a cooperative internet. Today we'll discuss how these ideas may shape the future of AI. Nathan, welcome to Everything Co-op.
I'm so grateful to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being on. I know you're in Boulder, Colorado, and you're 3 hours early, so it's 7:30 out there. So thank you for getting up early and coming on with us.
It's worth it.
Oh, and congratulations on becoming a tenured professor.
Thank you.
So for listeners who may not follow AI closely, how would you explain AI, artificial intelligence, in everyday language?
It's important to recognize it can be a slippery term. The meaning of this has changed over the years, and it's a term that goes back many decades. But really what it means is trying to get computers to do things, and particularly to do intellectual things that humans do. The idea that we are the only thinking things on Earth, right? In a certain sort of way. We've gotten attached to that idea as human beings, and artificial intelligence is the idea that maybe we can get machines, essentially glorified rocks, stitched together with silicon and wires and things like that to actually think in ways that at least imitate the ways that we think, that can do things that we do by thinking. And so it's an imitation game, but it's also involves computers functioning very differently than we do. And it is in no way replicating who we are, but it is imitating one of the things that we as humans do in a very different kind of way.
So AI is getting rocks to think.
There you go.
Okay. And act human, perhaps with feelings and emotions and yeah. Okay. Artificial intelligence, and I guess that's where the artificial comes in. They're intelligent beings, robots, but it's artificial intelligence. You have to program them. All right.
That's right. And we don't program them in the way that we have programmed computers traditionally, which is if this, then that. Every instruction is spelled out in traditional computer programming. The way the current approach to AI works is a little different. Rather than telling it, here's what you do if you encounter this, here's what you do if you encounter that, everything's spelled out. Instead, we just throw all the data we can possibly get at a certain kind of machine, at a certain kind of computer program, and it reads all of that, it ingests all of it, and develops a kind of capacity to imitate intelligence. So it's built on the data of our lives, the data of our civilization. That's really the way we program these things. And then once that's done, we program them by talking to them. It's really remarkable how much computer programming, in a certain sense, has become language. People just talking to these machines because they've learned in quotes, how to interact in human language rather than just in computer code.
Wow. Once upon a time, I wanted to be a programmer, but did not go down that road. Are you a programmer, or are you just the media side of stuff?
I have the same story. When I was in college, I did a year as a computer science major, and I really enjoyed it. I loved the problem solving side of it, but I realized pretty quickly I was actually ultimately much more interested in what people would do with these things and how power would flow and who was in charge. And so I still program as a hobby sometimes, but one of the things that has emerged about in the last few years with these AI tools is that they are very good at programming themselves. So now a lot of software engineers are writing less and less code by hand and more overseeing artificial intelligence tools to write the code for them. And that's a pretty remarkable thing when computers can start making the programming themselves.
Yeah. So I'm a little bit older than you. And when I went to undergrad, I went to a historically black college, and we barely had an electric typewriter, let alone a computer. I started in 1965 and finished in 1970. So IBM was just coming out with mainframes then. It was a long way before we got to computers you can carry around in a phone. It's a long way. And we had IBM cards, and you put the 0 and 1s to tell it what to do. Okay, so I majored in math and chemistry undergrad and thought I wanted computers. But in a PhD program in mathematics, I wanted to know about people. Okay, we were talking about strings of equations and stuff, and I wanted to know how people operated and worked. And by the way, people think AI is simply technology development. Why do you think AI is also a question of economics, ownership, and democracy?
Yeah, I love this question because I do think we have a tendency as a society to think technology is detached from those things, from economics, from government, from questions about ownership. And I think it's really important to recognize that the AI that we're getting is a construct of all of those things. It's made up of all of those things. The kind of products that many people are experiencing this wave of AI, and whether it's a summary at the top of a Google search or a chat interface from OpenAI like ChatGPT, or an interface designed for writing code. These are all built out of the things that people think can make money, and the things that people are able to raise large amounts of capital to do. Also, some of the really dark sides that are starting to emerge right now. For instance, we're starting to see evidence from anecdotal experience many of us are seeing in our communities around us of people getting kind of addicted to these things. Like, people have been addicted to social media. They start replacing human interaction with with a chatbot. And that is in part a product of what these companies think might make them money. They're trying to gather up a lot of data through these interactions. They're trying to build ad businesses in some cases, and that requires getting people to spend more time on these tools. And also that we've decided as a society, I would say, even though it's not often said outright, that we want to develop these tools through private companies rather than, for instance, public investment or other kinds of corporate structures. We're not building them primarily through, say, a nonprofit structure. We actually, OpenAI that makes ChatGPT originally set up as a nonprofit, but they weren't able to raise enough money given the rules of the economy in the United States. And so they have converted to a for-profit investor-owned corporation. And I think that's really telling. It shows, first of all, that the people who are building these tools recognize that ownership matters and the structure of the organization is going to have an effect on the technology. But it also reveals that the options are really limited. And in our society, we enable large amounts of capital to go toward for-profit companies in a way that it's harder to do in other kinds of organizations. And this is a kind of technology that, at least in its current form, requires a lot of money up front, requires these big data centers, requires a lot of access to data. It's expensive. And so the forms that it takes are going to be organized by the way that this society allows those forms to take hold. And I'm really interested in how could we do this otherwise? Do we have other options?
That's interesting because it's not only access to data, it's access to water, access to electricity, access to land in order to have these huge centers processing all of this data. Yeah, it's
That's right.
Very interesting what the effect of this AI is going to be on humanity also, and just the processing of data.
It's so important to recognize, these tech companies a few years ago had all these commitments for reducing their carbon impact, addressing climate change, and they've thrown all that out the window in order to build these data centers and to compete in this AI race. And this is something, I think probably is going to be familiar to a lot of listeners because communities all over the country are experiencing the kinds of conflicts emerging from the desire to construct these data centers, which don't employ many people, take up a lot of water and electrical resources, often result in raising electricity costs. And so the benefit to communities is pretty limited given the footprint and the demands of these facilities. So it's just a reminder that it can feel like digital tools are just up there in a magic cloud somewhere, but no, the cloud is in someone's community, and that's a really important part of this story. It's not just a virtual industry. This is a very physical, industrial process, and it has some really it should raise the question all the time: is this technology worth that cost? Is it something that we really need enough, are going to benefit enough to justify the environmental impact, the economic impact, the whirring sounds of these data centers that their neighbors are hearing all the time? It's a question that we should be able to ask, and in too many contexts, we're actually not able to ask that question collectively.
So I get some of the concerns environmentally. What's a concern as it relates to the current concentration of power in AI?
Well, one pattern that we're starting to see is that companies in industries that where these technologies are really making a difference already. Software development is an example of this. We're seeing this starting to happen in customer service and in industries that involve the manipulation of language, and in some cases where AI tools are able to do things that before humans have had to do. And the result is that companies are laying off workers, so they're reducing the number of workers they're paying, whose livelihoods they're supporting, and instead they're redirecting that money to a small number of big AI companies. So if that pattern continues, you have an enormous concentration where before, people at least would have a voice, even if it was a small voice, have some kind of participation in a workplace. And that's being replaced by tools that are controlled by a small number of companies. So more and more of the activity of economic production is going from people being paid wages to costs charged to the same companies over and over. So you can imagine a situation where regardless of the industry, a huge chunk of the budget of any given company might be paying for the services of these AI tools that companies, organizations, governments are relying on. And the capacity of these companies could start to become quite unique. So we've recently had this situation where the company Anthropic, one of the major AI firms, just produced a tool called Mythos, a large language model that is able to find vulnerabilities in software systems, in computer systems that no one had found before. That's an enormous amount of power, because suddenly this company could have the ability to take offline other organizations across the economy if they wanted to. So far they haven't, and they don't appear to want to. They seem to be doing their best to help other organizations actually prepare for this and patch their vulnerabilities and solve the problems. But nevertheless, that's a lot of power that they hold. That's a kind of power over the whole rest of the economy that feels pretty unprecedented. And these are already some of the largest companies by their value that the world has ever seen. It was just a few years ago that we had our first $1 trillion company. Now we have several of them. We just had the SpaceX IPO. SpaceX, in addition to being a rocket company, is also an AI company. And so the amount of capital, the amount of money, resources that is being concentrated in a very small number of companies on the assumption that they're going to transform the way productivity happens across the economy is really new. And this is something that we should be, anyone concerned about democratic society should be in turn concerned about.
So taking the power from the masses to the extent that the masses had power, whatever power the masses employees had is now will be concentrated in a few companies.
That's right.
So what do you see cooperative AI being? What does that look like?
So I've been really interested since this current wave of AI began to take hold in 2022, 23, in whether it's possible to do this differently. I'm a tinkerer. I like to experiment with new tools. And, when I started seeing the power of what these things could do, that on the one hand, I was seeing it in my classrooms where students were starting to turn in work that had been produced by AI. And, it wasn't, in many respects their work. And this has been an ongoing challenge. But at the same time, you see, okay, this thing can produce a convincing college essay. And in my own work, playing around with, things I used to code by hand for hours and hours as a, hobbyist software developer, these tools could just come up with in a few seconds. And starting to just see glimpses of that power. And then, I spent a lot of time reading discussions among workers in these affected industries, just talking to each other online about the way these tools are affecting their lives. The power is very real. And I've just wanted to stop and ask, could we do this differently? How else could this be done? And this is something I've been doing in the online economy for a long time. For instance, we had a decade ago, the big thing on the internet was like the gig economy, Uber and Lyft and Airbnb and this sort of thing. Hey, what would it look like if those platforms were owned and governed by the people working at them? Here in Colorado now we have a driver-owned rideshare, and it's just a totally different experience. The drivers co-own the company. They get to set the rules. They make a lot more money per ride than they do working for Uber and Lyft. And so I started asking, could we approach AI differently too? And, I'm not the only one. Others in the cooperative movement have been asking this question too. And I think it's really important to recognize that AI is not just one thing. It's actually a lot of interlocking parts. It's the data that's used to train. It's the data centers. It's the interfaces that users experience. And actually, if we break those apart, it becomes a little easier to start to imagine how people might be able to own and govern these kinds of systems in a different way. And we start to imagine what would it look like if maybe workers owned and governed their, the tools that were being introduced into their workplaces, so that they knew, hey, my job is more or less safe. I can explore how this tool could help make my life better rather than seeing it as a threat. Where communities that are seeing these tools come into their lives could have a say in where we draw the lines. This is something we think a lot about at the university, for instance, there are some spaces where maybe it's good for students to explore these tools and to learn them and get to know them and become expert in them. But there are other places where, we actually just need you to learn how to write that essay, because that's an important process for learning how to think.
Or do that research.
That's right. And if we're not controlling the tools together, if we don't have power in that conversation, we don't get to say where the lines are drawn. Maybe we as a university or, we as a company want to say we're willing to use these tools, but only if they're running on renewable energy. If you're just doing a contract with OpenAI or Anthropic, you don't get to decide what their energy sources are. But if these tools were being co-owned, then that's a conversation you can begin to have. And there are some examples starting to show up around the world where people are recognizing this opportunity and starting to enter into it.
So what does democratic ownership of AI look like in practice?
So I'll give you a few of those examples just to give you a taste, and they're different. And I'll just, emphasize, as with anything cooperative, none of these are perfect. These are just opportunity. I think of cooperatives as an opportunity, not a guarantee. But for instance, you have cases at the large scale, like, some of our legacy cooperatives are entering into this context. Like a case is Land O'Lakes, the butter company, a co-op of farmers, and they've developed their own AI tools in collaboration with companies like Microsoft, but where they're able to keep control over the data that they feed into it. So the idea is that the farmers co-own the co-op. They all contribute data from their machines, from their farming machines into the cooperative, which uses them to train a tool that in turn those same members can use to inform their farming practices. So, even though there's a big tech company involved, the data that the farmers own is kind of a closed loop. They retain ownership of it, and they get to see the benefits of it. And those kinds of, that's one way in which a community can say, okay, we're going to interact with this new system, but we're going to control our data in the process. Another example actually comes out of a collaboration I've been involved in Europe, where, here in the US again, all the big AI models are coming out of big for-profit companies. In Europe, several governments now, including Switzerland, I just saw the Netherlands, and then there's an EU-wide project. They've been creating public AI systems. So they're actually having the government invest in building models, especially trained and focused on the national languages, which often aren't well represented in the US models. And so they have actually built these models as a public good. And then when they start deploying it, I had the opportunity to have some conversations with a group of Swiss engineers who had built this model, and they wanted to give access to it through a cooperative. Switzerland has a lot of cooperatives. Mm-hmm. And so the idea is that the consumers who are using the AI tools are the ones who own the servers that their tools are running on. They don't own the whole model and the whole process that involved government investment, but that kind of last mile part of it, they get to own. They get to decide, what kind of energy are we using to run these servers? What kind of rules are we setting for how it can and can't be used? And so they've taken a part of the stack and said, we want control over that.
Okay, so the examples you have given me are fantastic, because I couldn't see how you could have a co-op to own the whole thing, own the data centers and processes, but pieces of it, yeah, it makes sense to me. Thank you. We're going to take our first break, and we'll be right back. I thank you. Welcome back, everybody. This is Vernon Oaks. The program is Everything Co-op. Nathan, we've been on the air 13 years. This coming October, we'll celebrate our 14th year on air, and National Co-op Bank has been our financial sponsor and our main cheerleader. They really have supported us throughout all of these years. We were only going to do it for 1 month, the month of October, and NCB, they support co-ops and co-op members by providing innovative financial services, particularly in low-income communities. And that I have found interesting and not what most banks do. Most banks go in affluent neighborhoods because they want to get their money back. In order to get their money back, they need collateral. And in low-income communities, a lot of folks don't have collateral. And because the co-op is owned by everybody, not one person, so it's hard for the banking institutions to collateralize their loans. And this was the reason in the 80s that NCB was formed, to help co-ops get the funding. So they've just been phenomenal. Have you worked with them, Nathan, in any way throughout your work at the university or any of the projects you're working on?
Just over the years, I've had a chance to interact with programs they've been involved in, especially supporting younger cooperators. And, I think that work is so important, because we need to keep, reinventing the cooperative movement with every generation, just like we need to, refresh our democracy with every generation. And so that investment in young folks is so important. And we need to keep pushing that tradition forward. I mean, we need to keep making sure that we have the tools to enable capital access for cooperative enterprises, not just investor-owned enterprises. And so that legacy that NCB is holding is something we need to, we need to keep building, keep going.
Yes. Yep. And they have great people within the bank carrying out that mission. So it's been an absolute pleasure working with them. So you've given us two examples, the Swiss government and Land O'Lakes. I would call Land O'Lakes a marketing co-op, in that these farmers own it. They bring in their milk, and then Land O'Lake will process it and send it out to all these different markets. A farmer in Wisconsin may not be able to market in San Diego or in New York, but Land O'Lakes can send out. So you may have butter or cottage cheese in different markets. And probably these farmers, well, not probably, can get a better price than they could if they were all competing against each other and having a middleman coming in and buying it and then processing it. So Land O'Lakes works for the farmers, and now they've come together to own the AI tools with Microsoft. So they own the data. And in the Swiss, it's a collaboration in Europe, where the Swiss paid for the training of the model, then they own the core technology. Can you give us a couple other examples of how co-ops or AI can be cooperated?
Yeah, absolutely. So one other case is in Europe. This is a read co-op, or their product is called Transcribus. And what it is a collection of researchers who do work on historical texts, and they need AI tools to help them transcribe texts written by hand a long time ago. They're often very hard to read. I also do this. I have handwriting that's pretty hard to read. And, I take notes on a tablet, a digital tablet, and then I, ask an AI tool to transcribe it. And then I get, a kind of written text that I'm able to copy and paste. They do this on an industrial scale for researchers doing historical work, and they need a very particular kind of models. And so they have built a cooperative that just specializes in the particular kind of task that they're doing, and again, keeps the whole thing under their control. One issue that we have with the big commercial models is a particular tool will come and then go without anybody being asked. In this context, the researchers really get to control their tools, and they won't change without their voice. Another example comes from a worker co-op. This is based in Canada. It's called HIFA. It's a really wonderful tech worker co-op that's been going for a number of years. So it's owned by the technologists building it. And these are a group of really committed people who love supporting tools that are privacy protecting and decentralized, so they're not built around one company. And they built a tool set called Rook, kind of like the chess piece, ROOK. And the idea here is that it's an AI package that an organization could deploy within itself and control their use of AI. And so it's kind of a complete tool set that enables a company to benefit from AI systems while keeping all the data and all the processing within under their control. So for instance, one company that I know has been experimenting with this is the law firm of local cooperative law firm here in Colorado, Jason Weiner's office. And they've been exploring the use of AI tools for some time, very carefully, very cautiously. And they are really drawn to this idea that, we control these tools there. We're not sending the data to anybody else's servers, and we're making use of this technology while making sure that it is, that nothing leaves our control without our permission. And so this kind of system could be really useful for, say, a worker cooperative that wanted to make sure that in addition to owning the company that they work at, they also own the AI tools that they might make use of. So this is a tool made by a worker cooperative that could be really appropriate for other worker cooperatives.
Could data cooperatives become as important in the 21st century as credit unions were in the 20th century?
I think that's a really interesting question. I got to say, I've been to a lot of meetings, been involved in reports about this idea of data cooperatives. And I think in some respects, people misunderstand how data works. A big pile of data doesn't do a whole lot of good. Data has to be generated constantly, and it has to have a particular purpose, and it has to be the right kind of stuff, and it has to be flowing in the right way. Think of data more like water. Sometimes it's nice to have a big lake of water, but no, you need that water you need the rain coming down. You need the lakes to be moving. Water is a moving thing. And so actually, I think it's really important to recognize that co-ops like credit unions, as you just mentioned, are already data cooperatives. And, they are already managing the data of their members, the financial data of their members. And increasingly we're seeing the credit unions think about, how to build, how to pool that data in appropriate ways that's also, fair to their members, to use some AI tools in some cases to gain insights. Maybe the data from one credit union is not really enough, but if credit unions pool that data together, they can get some real insights, and they can help their members better. And so I think in some respects, this could be an invitation to cooperatives of many kinds to say, are you already a data cooperative? Not based on just raw data, but based on the the flows of information that are already happening in your organization? And is there a way that you can leverage those flows, make more, to develop some insights about them using AI tools that might be able to process that data more easily than humans could, while at the same time keeping that data under control of those humans, to make sure that anything that happens with that stuff is accountable to the people who it comes from. So I think in some respects, I'd say yes, the future is data cooperatives. And I think we also need to make it a lot easier for companies of all kinds to do the right thing and to keep data that they're using under the control ultimately of the people, who it comes from. And so, if we had more of these kind of organizations that were set up to help companies dealing with medical data or other kinds of things, make sure that, their hands are tied a bit more, that they can't abuse their customers' data the way that we often see happen in our world today. I think that could be a real contribution from the cooperative movement.
Seems like that's the fear, is that Uncle, Big Brother, is watching everything I do. It looks at my credit cards and everything I spend money on, my checking account, and they put a profile of me, and then they try to send ads, whether it's conscious ads or subliminal ads, to help influence me to spend my money, to buy things I might need, may not need. Using the data that way, as opposed to using data as a credit union might use it to say, perhaps even the same spending data, to say you might be better off as a family if you look at the spending here and see how you're doing. I know the first time I looked at my spending, my wife and I did, we were amazed at how much we spent going out for meals, how much of our money was for going out. And then we decided, well, let's start preparing meals, and saving more. So that's the kind of use of data that can be very, very helpful, as opposed to using that same data to try to get me to spend more maybe spend more than I even bring in, which too many Americans do. Spend more than they make, no matter what they make. So it's how do you use the data? Quick, good. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's so important to recognize. I just saw a study that suggested that Google is making hundreds of dollars on an average American every year. If you add up all the people who are using it and the amount of revenue they're raising, I spend less than that to be a member of a digital cooperative called May 1st Movement Technology. It's a kind of social movement grounded cooperative. I use that for my email. I use that for a lot of other services as well. And it turns out actually it's a pretty good deal to be able to just say, instead of having this other company profit off of me for a service that I get sort of for free, but that really I'm paying with the data of my life. Instead, I'm gonna move those services over to something that I'm paying for, but really I'm paying a lot less in the end. And I'm also paying for the service, the relationship. When I have a problem, I get to interact with the people who maintain the systems. It's a very different relationship to technology, and I think that's something that that I hope that the cooperative movement can help make easier for more people. Make it so that this is not just something that you have to be highly motivated to do, but that it's just a normal thing to be able to put in the pay for the cost of the services you use, make sure that they're loyal to you, that they're on your side rather than that they're kind of working against you, which is how a lot of these systems are. And we have to be especially concerned about AI systems. The social media industry, it took something that was not a commodity before, our relationships, and turn that into something you could buy or sell. It mapped our relationships to each other and then advertised to us on the basis of that. Nobody had quite figured out how to make money on human relationships in that way. Now these AI companies are poised to make money on our thoughts and on labor, on thinking itself, on our training their models based on interactions with us as we're thinking through some kind of difficult question, as we're working through a task in our workday. That thought has become a source of a commodity, something that someone can buy and sell. Wow. And I think we need to be really attentive to how vulnerable that makes us, how much these systems are capable of learning about us, and how important it is to ensure that if we're going to use these things, we should always ask, do we really need it? But to the extent that we're using these things, to the extent that they can be beneficial to us, let's make sure they're on our side and not working against us, because these are very, very powerful systems that can, manipulate us, that they can get to know our vulnerabilities, that can have a kind of awareness in a certain sense, and they're in a digital way, not in a human way, but in a digital way, of things that that we can't have an awareness of. There's a real vulnerability there, and so the question of accountability becomes all the more important, and that's something that the cooperative movement specializes in.
So the cooperative movement values include self-help, self-responsibility, democracy, equity, equality, and solidarity. How can AI be developed in ways that strengthen these values?
I think it's a really good question, and I think it starts with these kinds of examples that I've been pointing to. Ways in which people are building on the existing legacies, an existing worker co-op, and say, okay, if we were to interact with these tools, how would we want to do it? Building on those existing legacies. As I'm thinking about this in the university, right, which is we're getting told a lot, we need to throw out all the old ways of doing things. All your old medieval guild, you need to be totally disrupted because this new technology has showed up. My approach is to say, no, actually, our old medieval guild can help us think through this technology, can help us ask, wait, what is actually valuable about this stuff, and what's actually, a risk to human dignity, frankly. And that's, I think it's important for us to lean on those legacies, but also to think about, how can these tools open some new doors? How can we teach them to work with solidarity, to incline our interactions with these systems in that direction? One thing I've, for instance, done in my own practice with some of these tools is I'll give it a little script. It's called a system prompt or skill, or different kind of terms for these things, where I say, don't just do a thing, explain it to me. Mm-hmm. Make sure that I understand everything you're doing at every step. Break it down, even if that involves being slower, if that involves using more tokens, which are the kind of units of processing for these things. Help make sure that I'm with you the whole way, because I want this experience to deepen my skills rather than de-skill me. You could also say, hey, these systems should not be about increasing the amount of time we're spending with them. They should be pointing us toward other people. They should be helping us connect with each other and deepen a relationship. I think there's a real threat here. It's a real risk that artificial intelligence could lead us to devalue and neglect our own intelligence and our own relationships and our own value. And I think we have to be really vigilant about that. And I don't think we know the answers. But I do think, again, that we have in institutions like our cooperative traditions, like our unions, our democratic governance, we have the tools to confront this and to meet this challenge democratically in a way that that builds on the solidarity of the past. And I think always be cautious when somebody says you need to throw out everything you used to know because a new technology has come along. I call that innovation amnesia. It's this idea that happens all the time where new technology shows up and everyone, we get the message, you need to throw out everything you thought you knew. And then usually a generation or two later, people realize, oh, we actually lost something really important there. Let's make sure we don't do that this time.
So many cooperative leaders are not AI experts, or maybe even just AI novice. So how important is the Cooperative Principle 5, education, training, and information, to ensuring that members can make informed decisions about AI?
I love that you bring that up, because I think this is it's an opportunity to open space. And I think that principle has been forgotten a lot in our cooperatives. We're not often holding space for member education. If members are going to really have power in our communities, we got to invest in their education. To take that kind of famous case of the Rochdale Cooperative in the 1840s in England, in addition to having a store, they had a reading room so the members could read the latest newspapers, catch up on the news of the day, be informed. And similarly, I think this is a moment where co-ops should be bringing their members together, just comparing experiences, thinking through it together. Hey, what opportunities come up? Do you see any value in this? Are you already using these tools in your work? Do you think they're helpful? Do you think they'd risk, our cooperative is at risk in any way? Just makes the space for mutual learning. I think that, the fundamental thing, and maybe this has been too, clear from this conversation, is nobody's really an expert in this. We don't know where it's going. Every year, the tools have changed dramatically and what they're capable of, and the ways in which you can interact with them. And so I think it's really important for folks who may feel intimidated by this moment, but who nevertheless are feeling some pressure from it, to just open up the space and lean on their communities and recognize that none of us understands what's going on here fully, even the people who claim they do. And actually, that the best way forward is for us to just learn from each other.
So I think that the next question you've pretty much answered, or you've been hitting on it. And what I have discovered in this show over the last 14 years is that co-ops are vehicles for dignity, hope, voice, ownership, and self-determination. How can AI be designed and governed to enhance human dignity rather than diminish it? And you were just giving an example of how it could be diminished if we just stop thinking and rely on the machine. But how can we enhance human dignity?
It's hard to put it better than it was just put by Pope Leo the 14th, who just came out with a major statement on AI, and it's called an encyclical. It's called Magnificat Humanitas. And this document is all about human dignity. And the central idea of the document, the central image he starts and ends with, is about the choice between building the Tower of Babel, a big singular tower, that he says is almost a kind of totalitarian enterprise. You think of these tech monopolies, a big tower, one big thing that everybody's relying on, everyone's building, or everybody's been forced into building together. And he compares it to a story of rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem after the Israelites were in exile. And in that case, he says it was done collectively, where each family, each group in the community built a part of the wall in their own way, using their own skills and their own culture and traditions. And he calls for this idea that, as we confront this challenge, we have to make sure that it is not just something that those people in Silicon Valley are doing for us. That this is something that, that we all need to be part of wherever we find ourselves. and that human dignity comes from participation, which doesn't mean I think it's really important not to be obsessed with AI. We should keep our focus on the things that matter in life, but to whatever, things like relationships and beauty and food and music and all these things. Mm-hmm. But to the extent that these tools are influencing our life, are part of our work in particular, are part of our, are impacting our communities, we got to be involved. We got to recognize that we're called to be, to be leaders in our own ways, and to discern, where is this useful? And if it is useful, how can I make sure it's really on my side?
So how do you make sure it's on our side? Cooperatives bought electricity, telecommunications, financial services to underserved communities. Could AI become a new kind of cooperative utility that's on our side?
I think there's so much to learn from that legacy, right? I mean, back in the 19th, there were big companies building power grids in cities, and they were neglecting people in rural communities all over the United States. And the federal government recognized there was a power imbalance here. And this was also a time where major legislation is being passed around antitrust, preventing big companies from controlling the economy. And those our democratic institutions stepped in and said, we need to create the capacity for communities to solve their own problems. And I think I'd love to see something like that coming from our democratic institutions today, to the extent that they're able, which is not just, I don't just want the government to take power over, to regulate these big mega companies. What I would love to see them do is what they did with rural electrics, and say, hey, here's a framework for capital access, for enabling communities to actually step into this challenge, solve their own problems in their own ways. Here are the resources to help do it. If you have a reasonable idea, you should be able to access capital. If your community has a need that everybody knows is a need, you should be able to access capital to do it and co-own the solution. And so I would love to see us build on that legacy from the 30s of solving problems through, people's own ingenuity, rather than solving problems by hauling the CEO before Congress and telling them you have to do this, because that just reinforces their power. Yep. Rather than really shifting the power to people.
Nathan, thank you so very much. We've run out of time. I have more questions, but we've run out of time. And I would like to get you on again, maybe in the next 6 months or so. And everybody out there, study AI and live cooperatively. We'll see you next week.